Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to our quiet sanctuary. The storm outside is quiet for now, but tonight, our journey takes us into its very heart. We travel to a world of stone and tempests, a place where magic is intrinsically tied to the bonds we forge and the oaths we swear. We are not here to discuss all 10 orders of the Knights Radiant, but to focus on the first, the one that embodies the very ideal of protection, leadership, and the impossible burden that comes with them. Settle in, quiet your mind, and let us explore the complete, ancient, and often tragic history of those who bind the winds themselves, the Windrunners. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now let's begin. Our story, like all stories in the Cosmere, begins before the beginning. It begins in a time of myth, a time before memory, with a force, or perhaps a being, known as Adonalsium. The fragments of lore we have gathered are hazy on this point. Some paint Adonalsium as a sentient, thinking god, the creator of all things. Others, however, suggest it was more of a primal force, a well of creation, vast and powerful, but perhaps lacking a singular directed consciousness. It was, in essence, the universe itself, aware and unaware, all at once. It was a power that was perhaps paralyzed by its own infinity, unable to act. And it was this power, this god, this force, that was destroyed. We call this event the Shattering. We know that 16 individuals, 16 conspirators gathered on a world we now call Yolen. Their motives are lost to us, buried under the weight of millennia. Were they greedy, seeking power for themselves? Was it an act of self-preservation, a last-ditch effort to stop something they feared? Or was it perhaps an act of mercy, an attempt to break the paralysis of Adonalsium, to separate its components so that the good parts could finally act, even if it meant freeing the evil parts as well? We do not know. We only know that they conspired, and they succeeded. Adonalsium was shattered, ripped apart into 16 primary aspects, 16 shards of infinite power, each one representing a piece of the original god. And the 16 conspirators who had been present took up these shards, becoming vessels, their mortal minds suddenly bound to an overwhelming, singular divine intent. They became gods themselves, and they scattered across the Cosmere, taking their power to new worlds. 2 of these shards, these new gods, eventually found their way to a planet that was already ancient, a world of stone and storms called Roshar. This was not a world they had created. Adonalsium had crafted Roshar long ago, shaping its bizarre ecology, its rockbud plants that pulled into themselves, its grass that retracted into the earth, and its strange native inhabitants, the Singers. Most importantly, Adonalsium had created the Spren, the cognitive ideas of things given life, and the high storms, the planet-spanning tempests that swept the land with violent regularity, infused with the very investiture of creation. The two shards who arrived were opposites, yet partners. One was cultivation, a force of change, growth, and the slow, deliberate prudence of nature. The other was honor. The vessel who held this shard was a man named Tanavast. He was, by all accounts, a good and caring man, but the shard he held was rigid. It was the shard of oaths, of promises, of binding, and of protection. Tanavast looked upon this world of storms and spren, and he did not seek to remake it. He adopted it. He claimed this system as his own. The ancient high storm, once a simple force of nature, became his voice. The investiture it carried became his power, the Stormlight. And the native spren of Roshar, these children of Adonalsium's original design, would become the vessels for his new magic. The story of the Windrunners, therefore, does not begin with Tanavast alone. It is a synthesis, a bond formed between the rigid intent of the Shard honor, the belief in oaths and protection, and the ancient, wild, natural magic of Roshar itself. But before Tanavast could create his knights, he needed generals. Before the Spren, there were the Heralds, and the first of them, the archetype of all that would follow, was their king. His name was Jezrien. On Roshar he was known by many names: Jezrien Elin in the Vorin lands, Yaezir in Azir, the Herald of Kings. He was the patron of the Order of Windrunners, the one who granted access to their surges, the powers of adhesion and gravitation. He was, in form and bearing, a king. He was tall, with the dark eyes and black hair of the Alethi, though his features were slightly off, a remnant of a time before the races of Roshar had settled. He had been a ruler on Ashin, the world mankind had fled, even before he became a herald. His very essence was that of leadership and protection. He was the first of the 10 heralds to join the Oathpact, the first to swear his life to the defense of humanity. He was the ideal, the very pattern of what a Windrunner should be, a protector of his people, a leader in a time of fear. And like all the great figures of this history, he was a tragic and profound failure. To understand that failure, we must understand the war that broke him. When humanity first arrived on Roshar, they were refugees, fleeing their old world, Ashin, which they themselves had destroyed with unbound surges. They were given sanctuary by the native singers, but humanity brought with them a new god, Odium, the shard of divine hatred. And in time, a conflict began. The singers, feeling betrayed by the humans and abandoned by honor, turned to Odium. Odium, in turn, granted them new powers, new forms, and a form of terrible immortality. He took the souls of their greatest warriors and bound them, creating the Fused. When a Fused was killed in battle, their soul, their cognitive shadow, would simply wait and be reborn into the next available Singer body. They were an eternal, undying army. Humanity was losing. Desperate, Honor and the Herald Ishar devised a plan. It was not a glorious pact of heroes. It was a desperate, terrible measure. It was called the Oathpact. 43 years into that first desolation, Honor met with 10 human volunteers. 5 men, 5 women. Among them, their leader, Jezrien. The Oathpact was, in essence, a magical net. The 10 heralds were bound to it, and through them, they were bound to the souls of the Fused. When the heralds died on the battlefield, their cognitive shadows were transported not to a peaceful afterlife, but to a world of damnation called Braze, where Odium and his Fused were imprisoned. As long as the heralds remained on Braze, their presence, their combined will, acted as a seal, a net that held the souls of the Fused in place, preventing their return to Roshar. But Odium's forces on Braze would hunt them. They would find the heralds and capture them, and they would torture them. They would use every torment imaginable to break their wills. The moment just one of the 10 heralds broke, the seal would shatter, and not only that herald, but all 9 others would be returned to Roshar, and with them, the Fused would return. The desolation would begin anew. This was the cycle. The heralds would fight, they would die. They would go to Braze. They would be tortured. One would break. They would all return. A new desolation would begin. They would teach humanity to rebuild, to fight, and they would lead them, and they would do it all over again. This cycle repeated for millennia. At first, the heralds held for centuries, giving humanity time to rebuild. But the torture was endless, and their minds were only human. They began to break faster. Soon, the desolations were separated by mere decades, then by years. Towards the end, there was barely a year between the end of one war and the start of the next. Humanity was not rebuilding. It was just surviving, living in a constant state of apocalypse. And the 10 heralds, their minds fractured by thousands of years of constant, unimaginable torment, could not bear it any longer. It ended at Aharietium, the last desolation. The battle was won. But this time, something was different. 9 of the heralds stood victorious on the battlefield. Only one, Talonel, known as Talon, the bearer of agonies, had fallen in the final fight. This meant that Talon's soul was already on Braze, already being prepared for the torture. But the other 9, they were alive, they were free. And in that moment, they saw a choice. They gathered, their minds reeling. It was Jezrien, their king, the Herald of Protection, who made the final command. We have his words recorded by the Herald Kalak. "It has been decided," Jezrien said, his voice regal even in betrayal. "We will go our ways. Our blades must be left. The Oathpact ends now." And they did. They abandoned their honor blades, the divine swords given to them by Honor himself, and they walked away. They walked away from their oaths. They walked away from their duty. And they left Taln, the single herald who could not protect himself, to bear the torture of all 10 alone. This was the original sin of the Windrunners. Their patron, their god, Jezrien, the herald of protection in his moment of ultimate trial, failed the single most important ideal of his order. He abandoned the one man he was sworn to protect. He left Taln to suffer alone on Braze for 4.5 millennia. Jezrien's fate was a slow, pathetic unraveling. He, like the other heralds, was still immortal, but his mind, severed from the Oathpact and his duty, decayed. He became Ahu, a drunken beggar in the Kholinar marketplace, whispering to strangers, "Have you seen me?" He had abandoned his identity, his honor, and so his mind had abandoned him. He became a man who literally could not remember who he was. This was the legacy of the Windrunners' founder. A promise broken, a man left behind, and a crown left in the gutter. Honor Tanavast saw this. He saw his heralds, his chosen champions, breaking under the strain. He saw his own death approaching, as Odium's relentless assault wore him down. He knew he needed another way. The heralds were a failure. He needed a new system, a plan B. So he created his angels. We must clear up a common misconception. The Spren of the Knights Radiant are not, as some believe, the ghosts of the dead Shard Honor created when he was splintered. The Radiant Spren existed long before Tanavast's death. They were an intentional, deliberate creation. We have a record of Honor's own thoughts on the matter. He said, "We decided to form 10 varieties. 10 because my power loved the symmetry. 10 because Kor loved me and knew this made me happy. Kor, of course, is the name he used for cultivation. We started with the first 7, then 1 variety was born of Kor alone. In counterpoint, and at her urging, I created 1 variety almost entirely on my own, my Angels of Honor. These were the Honorspren. They were not just magical phenomena. They were agents of Honor's intent. They were splinters of both honor and cultivation, but as they themselves say, they are almost entirely of Honor. They were designed to mimic Honor himself. Tanavast, knowing his own death was near and that his heralds were compromised, created a new army, a vast legion of sentient angels who could seek out mortals, bond with them, and carry on his intent long after he was gone. As his death loomed, Tanavast passed this responsibility, the task of creating new Honorspren, to the greatest Spren in the Rosharan system, the Stormfather, the cognitive reflection of the High Storm itself. The Stormfather became their progenitor, which is why the Honorspren are often called his children. But after a great tragedy, which we will come to, the Stormfather was so wounded that he stopped creating them for centuries. Only much later did he create a new batch, just 10 of them, who would in turn create more, allowing the Honorspren to slowly rebuild their shattered nation. One of those first 10, one of the Stormfather's direct children, was a Spren named Sylphrena. To understand these Spren, we must understand their home. We must journey to the place they live, the cognitive realm, known on Roshar as Shadesmar. Imagine, if you will, a world that is the precise inverse of our own. It is a world of pure thought, the place where the soul of an object resides. In Shadesmar, the land, the solid continents of the physical realm, are represented as a great, dark, churning ocean. But it is not an ocean of water. It is a sea of tiny, dark, translucent glass beads. Each bead is the cognitive aspect, the soul of a non-living object, a rock, a spear, a city wall. If you were to plunge your hand into this viscous sea, you would not feel wetness, but you would feel impressions. You would feel the stubbornness of the stone, the sharpness of the spear, the ancient weight of the city wall. It is a sea of pure idea, and it is a place where one can drown, suffocated by the concepts of the physical world. The oceans of our world, the great empty spaces, are inverted in Shadesmar. They are solid land, a vast continent of cold, black, glassy obsidian. This is where the Spren live. And above, the sky is not blue, but a pitch, empty black. There are no stars, no moons. There is only a single, small, frail, and unmoving white sun on the horizon, casting just enough light to see. And the shadows in this land behave strangely. They do not point away from the sun. They stretch towards it, as if the light itself is a source of gravity. This is the kingdom and birthplace of Spren, and it is here that the Honorspren built their capital, their great fortress, lasting integrity. It is a sight to behold. A massive, rectangular fortress made of brilliant blue stone. It stands on its shorter end, jutting hundreds of feet into the black sky, a sheer, windowless tower of defiance. Inside, the fortress is hollow, and gravity itself is bound by strange laws. Each of the 4 internal walls is its own ground. You can walk up one wall, and as you step onto the next, your gravity shifts, and that new wall becomes down. The city is built upon these 4 surfaces, a dizzying array of libraries, gardens, and walkways. In those gardens you will find crystalline plants, but also real, physical realm trees kept alive by stormlight, their branches stretching past the 15-foot gravity bubble, causing their leaves to fall endlessly toward the true bottom of the fortress, far below. And you will find statues of male and female Honorspren, cast in heroic poses, their stone clothing seeming to ripple in a wind, that doesn't blow. These are the dead of the recreants, their memorial. This fortress, this citadel, is not the bastion of honor you might imagine. It is a city defined by a centuries-old argument. It is a civilization fractured by trauma. When you walk its gravity-defying streets, you will see the two factions. The older Honorspren, often dressed in rigid, formal, or military attire, are the isolationists. They are the ones who remember the trauma most clearly. They are terrified of humans whom they see as fundamentally treacherous. They resist the idea of new Nahil bonds, believing it will only lead to their destruction once more. And then there are the younger Honorspren, often seen in loose, flowing robes. They are the ones who wish to fight. They believe in the old ideals, that their purpose is to bond with mortals and save the world from odium. They are the rebels, the idealists, the ones who look at the older generation's fear and see it as cowardice. This conflict, this trauma, is the heart of Honorspren society, and it is all because of the second great betrayal, an event that casts a shadow even longer than Aharietium. We call it the Day of Recreance. We must be clear. Aharietium was the betrayal of the Heralds. It was an act of selfishness and weakness. 9 people fleeing their torment and leaving one behind. The recreance happened thousands of years later, around 2,000 years before the modern era. This was the betrayal of the Knights Radiant. And it was not an act of selfishness. It was, perhaps, the most tragic act of selflessness in history. By this time, the Heralds were long gone, faded into myth. The Knights Radiant, bonded to Spren like the Honorspren, were the sole protectors of Roshar. They were at the height of their power, clad in shardplate, and wielding living shard blades. They were engaged in a conflict known as the False Desolation, and in the midst of this war, they were given a vision. It came from the dying Shard Honor himself, from Tanavast, whose mind was cracking under Odium's assault. The vision revealed a terrible, world-shattering truth. Humanity was not native to Roshar. They were the invaders. The singers, the parshmen they had enslaved, were the true natives. The humans had come from another world, Ashen, a world they had utterly destroyed with the very surge-binding powers they now used to protect Roshar. They learned the truth. They were the original Voidbringers. In previous generations, when Radiants had learned this, Honor had been there to counsel them, to assure them that their cause was now just. But Tanavast was no longer the god he had been. He was dying. He was raving, as the records say, about the Dawn Shards, the ancient weapons used to destroy Ashen. He did not comfort his knights. He promised them that they would do it again. He promised them that they, the Knights Radiant, would inevitably destroy Roshar, just as their ancestors had destroyed Ashen. The Stormfather, who holds the remnants of Tanavast's mind, remembers this moment with grief. He admits that he showed them the future, but did not explain it was only a possible future. The knights saw only one outcome. their powers would lead to the annihilation of their new home. And so these thousands of knights from 9 of the 10 orders made a choice. They enacted the ultimate, twisted, tragic version of the Windrunner ideal. I will protect those who cannot protect themselves, even from me. To protect Roshar from themselves, they chose to abandon their powers. We have a record of it, from a vision at Feverstone Keep. The knights radiant, thousands of them, walked back from the front lines. In perfect formation, they approached the keep. Then, one by one, they drove their living shard blades into the stone ground. They unfastened their shard plate, letting it fall in heaps, and then they just walked away. They abandoned their oaths, their spren, and their sacred duty, all in a desperate, misguided attempt to save the world. The consequence of this act was a horror beyond their comprehension. The Nahel bond, which we will explore, is an intimate linking of spirit webs. It is a bond of souls. When the Radiants broke their oaths, their spren died. We know now that the spren, in their own way, agreed to this. They too saw the vision. They too feared the destruction of Roshar. And so, in a mutual, terrible decision, the bonds were severed. For the sapient spren, the Honorspren, the cryptics, the ink spren, this severing was not a simple parting. It was a spiritual death. Their minds were ripped out. Their cognitive forms in Shadesmar were blinded, their eyes appearing as if scratched out. They became dead eyes, mindless, screaming things, eternally bound to the physical realm, drawn to the descendants of the Radiant who had killed them, and their physical bodies, the shard blades they had formed, died. They were no longer living metal that could be summoned at will. They became the dead shard blades of the modern era, swords that screamed in the minds of those who held them. The shard plate, too, became dead, a parasitic armor that had to be fed gemstones to function. This is the legacy of the Recreants. The world was not saved. It was left defenseless. The spren were murdered by the thousands, and their corpses were picked up by mortals, becoming the treasured weapons of the very people who had betrayed them. Now you understand the trauma of lasting integrity. Now you understand the centuries-old argument. When an older Honorspren looks at a human, they do not see a potential partner. They see a murderer. When they see a shard blade, they do not see a magical sword. They see the corpse of a relative. Their entire isolationist policy is built on a single grieving question. We trusted you once. You slaughtered us. Why in the name of Honor's shattered corpse should we ever trust you again? This is the broken world the modern Windrunners are born into. A world where their god is dead, their patron is a mad beggar, and their spren partners are the traumatized survivors of a genocide, living in a fortress of fear. To rebuild the Order, 2 broken pieces, a human and a spren, would have to find a way to heal. This healing is the magic. It is called the Nahel Bond. The Nahel bond is not simply a magic system. It is a symbiotic, spiritual relationship. It is, as the Spren describe it, an intimate linking of spirit webs. It gives something profound to both parties. The human, the radiant, gains the powers of surge binding. They gain the ability to inhale stormlight, the gaseous investiture of the high storms, and use it to power incredible feats. They gain supernatural reflexes, agility, and, most famously, the ability to heal from wounds that would kill any normal person. As the bond progresses, they gain the ability to summon their Spren as a living shard blade, and eventually to call upon them as a suit of living shard plate. But what does the Spren get? In the physical realm, a Spren like an Honorspren is weak. They are little more than a mote of light, a flicker of wind. They have trouble thinking, trouble remembering, trouble being. The Nahel bond provides them with an anchor. The human mind, the human soul, stabilizes the Spren in the physical world. In return for the powers, the Spren gains sapience. This is the miracle we witness with the Windrunner Kaladin and his Honorspren Syl. When she first finds him, she is little more than a child, a curious Windspren. She is forgetful, naive. But as Kaladin begins to change, as he begins to swear the oaths that progress their bond, Syl grows. She gains the ability to think, to reason, to remember her past in Shadesmar. She becomes her true self in the physical realm. This is the genius of the Windrunner Order. The magic is not a tool. It is a byproduct of the character arc. The Spren's intelligence is directly proportional to the Radiant's moral and psychological growth. A Radiant does not get power. They earn it by confronting their own flaws and becoming a better, more self-aware person. The power of the Nahel bond is the power of a healed soul. When this bond is forged, the Windrunner gains access to 2 of the 10 fundamental surges. The first and most spiritually significant is the surge of adhesion. This is not simple, sticky magic. The Spren call adhesion Honor's truest surge. It is, they say, of honor alone. This is why it is so unique. The fused Odium's soldiers have access to 9 of the 10 surges, but they cannot use adhesion. It is alien to them. The sibling, the Spren of the Great Tower of Urithiru, calls adhesion the surge of binding and oaths. Its primary use is an ability called the Full Lashing. By infusing a surface with stormlight, the Windrunner creates an extremely powerful temporary bond between 2 objects. This bond is not mere suction or glue. It is a spiritual binding. The bond is so strong that most objects will shatter into pieces before the bond itself fails. Think of what this means. The Windrunner's truest power, the one that comes directly from honor, is the physical manifestation of an oath. When they swear their ideals, They force a bond onto their own soul. When they use a full lashing, they are literally forcing that same concept of binding onto the physical world. Their first power is not flight, it is the power of the promise. Their second power, the one they are most famous for, is the surge of gravitation. This is the power that gives them their name. It is the power of flight. It allows a surge binder to manipulate an object's gravitational attraction. The Windrunner uses this surge in two primary ways. The first is the basic lashing. This ability allows the Windrunner to alter their own spiritual gravitational bond. Normally, we are all bound to the planet below. A Windrunner can, by infusing themselves with Stormlight, change that bond, lashing themselves to a different point or a different direction. By lashing themselves upward multiple times, they can overcome the planet's natural pull and fly. They can soar through the sky faster than the storm itself. They can also use this offensively, lashing an enemy to the ground with 3 or 4 times the force of normal gravity, crushing them, or lashing them into the sky to be left helpless. The second ability is the reverse lashing. This is more subtle. Instead of changing an object's own gravity, it creates a gravitational field around an object, pulling other objects to it. This requires a command and consumes very little stormlight. This is the power Kaladin uses in battle to pull arrows out of the air, creating a bubble of protection around himself where projectiles are drawn to his shield or armor rather than the men beside him. These two surges, adhesion and gravitation, seem contradictory. One is the surge of binding, of being held in place. The other is the surge of freedom, of flight. But this duality is the Windrunner. They are the freest of all radiants, soaring above the world, precisely because they are the most bound by their oaths, bound by their duty, bound by their crushing sense of responsibility. Their magic is a perfect metaphor for their philosophy. And that philosophy is codified in the 5 ideals we call the immortal words. To become a Windrunner, a person cannot simply be good. They must be broken. The Spreen are drawn to those who have been shattered by life, because as Syl herself explains, the cracks are what allow the stormlight in. The oaths are the process of healing those cracks. The first ideal is the one shared by all 10 orders of the Knights Radiant. It is the motto, the guiding principle, the axiom upon which all radiance is built. Life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. These are not simple platitudes. They are a profound philosophical framework. Life before death is the rejection of despair. It is the fundamental choice that a broken person must make. It is the choice to live, to value life, and to defend it, rather than succumb to the darkness and trauma that defines them. It is the Radiant's first, most basic stand against the futility that odium represents. Strength before weakness is not a command to be strong. It is an acceptance of a fundamental truth. It is the understanding that you will be weak, that you will fail, that you will stumble. Strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the act of rising again. It is the acceptance of the stumbles, the trials, and the pain as part of the process. Journey before destination is the core of the entire philosophy. It is the answer to the age-old question of whether the ends justify the means. The Radiant philosophy states unequivocally that they do not. How you achieve a goal is more important than the goal itself. Everyone's destination in the end is the same: the grave. What defines a person, what gives their life meaning, is not that final destination, but the journey they took to get there. It is the acceptance that the pain and the failure are the journey, just as much as the triumph. This first ideal is the baseline. It is the act of a broken person deciding to stand up. From there, the Windrunner swears the second ideal, the one that defines their entire purpose. I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. This is the oath that attracts the big sibling types, the natural leaders, the people who are instinctively drawn to the defense of the defenseless. It is the oath that defines the order, but it is also a trap. It is a noble, beautiful, and flawed concept. It is too absolute. It creates an impossible, crushing burden. What happens when everyone around you needs protection? What happens when two different groups, both of whom cannot protect themselves, are fighting each other? This second ideal is the source of the Windrunners' greatest strength, but it is also the source of their greatest psychological weakness. It is a burden that no single person can possibly bear, and that is the entire point of the oaths that follow. The third ideal is where the journey becomes truly personal. The theme of the third ideal is the removal of caveats to the second. It is about identifying your greatest blind spot, the prejudice or hatred that stops you from truly protecting everyone. To swear this ideal, a Windrunner must look in the mirror, find the one person or concept they have excluded from their protection, and embrace it. The words of this ideal are different for everyone, because everyone's flaws are different. We have 3 perfect examples from the modern Windrunners. For Kaladin, his bias was external. He was a Dark Eyes who had been oppressed his entire life by Light Eyes. He hated them. To swear his third ideal, he had to protect the man he hated most, King Elhokar, from his own friend. His words were, "I will protect even those I hate, so long as it is right." For the bridgeman Teft, his hatred was internal. He was an addict, consumed by self-loathing over a childhood tragedy where he felt he had betrayed his family. He hated himself. To swear his third ideal, he had to finally accept that he was also worth protecting. His words were, "I will protect those I hate, even if the one I hate most is myself." And for the Lopen, the one-armed Herdazian, His flaw was his own casual cruelty. He used humor as a weapon, mocking others relentlessly, and excused it by mocking himself just as much. To swear his third ideal, he had to realize that his jokes were a form of harm. His words were, "I've got to protect people, you know, even from myself." The second ideal creates the burden. The third ideal expands it, forcing the Radiant to protect those they despise. This creates a psychological pressure cooker that leads to burnout, breakdown, and despair. This is the great filter for the Order. To survive this, the Windrunner must swear the fourth ideal. The fourth ideal is the antidote to the second and third. It is the rarest of the oaths, the one that most Radiants never reach. It is the ideal of acceptance. It is the moment the Windrunner finally understands their limits. The words we know are Kaladin's, and they are the words that haunted his entire life. I accept that there will be those I cannot protect. This is the moment the Windrunner forgives themselves for not being a god. It is the acceptance that they will fail, that people will die on their watch, and that this failure does not negate their oath. It is the moment they let go of the crushing guilt that the second ideal creates. This is the step that Jezrien and the Recreant's Radiants never took. They could not accept their limitations or their failures, and so, in their different ways, they broke. The fourth ideal is the path to true strength, the strength of acceptance. And finally, the fifth ideal, the final transcendence. We have few examples, but we know that for the Skybreakers, their fifth ideal is, "I am the law." They become the concept they serve. For the Windrunner, the path seems to be the same. It is the final step, the surgeon's choice, the lesson that Kaladin's father, a surgeon, tried to teach him from the very beginning. Sometimes, to protect, you must choose. You must sacrifice a part to save the whole. It is the terrible divine responsibility of triage. But it is also something more. It is not just about becoming a warrior. It is about becoming protection itself, in all its forms. It is the understanding that true protection can mean healing. It can mean acceptance, and it can even mean stepping back. It is the final synthesis of the warrior and the healer. It is the moment the Windrunner transcends their own burden and at last becomes whole. This entire philosophical journey is the story of the Windrunners. We see it play out in the history of Roshar, but we see it most clearly in the life of one man, the man who would refound the Order, Kaladin, Stormblessed. Kaladin's entire life was an unwitting preparation to become a Windrunner. He was born in the town of Hearthstone, the son of Lirin, a surgeon. His father, without knowing the words, taught Kaladin the philosophy of the oaths. When the town's bright lord, Roshar, was wounded, Lirin saved his life. The life of a man he despised, telling his son that a surgeon must treat even those you hate. This was the third ideal. When Lirin had to make the terrible choice of who to save in an emergency, He taught Kaladin the agonizing concept of triage, the understanding that you cannot save everyone. This was the fourth and fifth. But Kaladin rejected this. He saw his father's way as passive. He wanted to protect in a different way. He joined the army of High Prince Amaram for one reason: to protect his younger brother, Tien. And in his first great failure, Tien was killed on a battlefield, a death Kaladin blamed himself for. This was the failure of the second ideal that would come to define his life. He was a brilliant soldier, a born leader, but his drive to protect was seen as arrogance. He was betrayed by his Bright Lord Amaram, who murdered Kaladin's squad to steal a shard blade, and then branded Kaladin as a slave. On his forehead, they burned two glyphs: Sasnan, meaning slave, and Shash, meaning dangerous. These brands were the physical marks of his failure. He was sent to the most miserable place in the Alethi war camps, the bridge crews of High Prince Sadeas, and he was assigned to the worst of the worst, Bridge 4. Bridge 4 was not a military unit. It was a death sentence. They were the most notorious crew, suffering the highest casualties on every single bridge run, a place where men were sent to die. When Kaladin arrived, he was at his lowest point. He was broken, apathetic, and suicidal. He was a man consumed by his failure to protect. He stood at the edge of the great honor chasm, ready to end his own life. And in that moment, he chose. He chose life before death. It was the first ideal, spoken in his heart. He looked at the other men of Bridge 4, the forgotten, the expendable, the lowest of the low, and he saw people who could not protect themselves. His purpose returned. He began to train them. He used his surgeon's knowledge to treat their wounds. He taught them to work as a team. He transformed them from a dejected rabble into a true squad. He even devised a new method, the side carry, to use the bridge as a shield, to protect his men from the storm of arrows. In this group, we meet the men who would become the New Order. Teft, a grizzled old sergeant with a secret shame. Rock, a giant horniator cook who saw the good in everyone. Sigzil, a quiet, analytical world singer. And Lopen, a one-armed, relentlessly optimistic Herdazian who joked about his own disability. They were, all of them, the men who had been forgotten, and with them, a spren had appeared, a small, blue-white light, like a flicker of wind that only he could see. Her name was Syl. She was an Honorspren, a child of the Stormfather, and she had defied her nation's isolationist laws to seek out a human, drawn by the echo of honor she saw in Kaladin's relentless, if failed, attempts to protect. The climax came at the Battle of the Tower. High Prince Sadeas betrayed Dalinar Kholin, leaving his army to be slaughtered by the Parshendi. Kaladin and Bridge 4, their freedom finally in sight, had a choice. They could escape, or they could turn back to save the very Light Eyes who had enslaved them. They chose to turn back. As they ran into the hopeless battle, Syl buzzed at Kaladin's ear, demanding the words. He did not know what she meant, but in his heart he did. He screamed the words into the storm. I will protect those who cannot protect themselves. In that moment, a burst of white-hot stormlight erupted from him, a wave of power that slammed into the Parshendi ranks. He had sworn the second ideal. He had accepted his calling. Dalinar Kholin, saved by their act, freed all of Sadeas's bridgemen. Bridge 4 became his personal honor guard, and Kaladin began his true journey as a Knight Radiant. It was not an easy path. His hatred for the Light Eyes, especially King Elhokar, festered. This was his blind spot. It came to a head in the palace of Kholinar. His old friend from the bridge crew, Moash, consumed by a need for vengeance, was seconds away from murdering the defenseless king. Kaladin, torn between his friend and the man he despised, had to choose. He chose protection. He swore the words, I will protect even those I hate, so long as it is right. He swore the third ideal, and in doing so, saved his enemy. But this new burden, the promise to protect everyone, became a trap. At the Battle of Thaylen Field, he was confronted with a fight between the Parshmen, whom he saw as an enslaved people, and the humans whom he was sworn to protect. He saw both sides as people who cannot protect themselves, and he froze. He was torn apart by his own oaths, unable to act. He tried to swear the next ideal, but the words would not come. He could not, would not accept that he had to let some of them die. His breakdown in the following year was profound. He was a warrior who could no longer fight, a protector who was paralyzed by his own need to protect. He was at his lowest point, back in the darkness of the chasm, believing he had failed everyone. It was only in a vision, guided by Dalinar, that he found his way. He was connected to the spiritual realm, and he spoke to a memory of his brother Tien. He confessed his guilt, and Tien forgave him. In that moment, Kaladin finally understood. It was not his fault. He was not a god. He could only do what he could, and he spoke the words that set him free. I accept that there will be those I cannot protect. He had sworn the fourth ideal, and as he spoke those words in the vision, back in the physical world, something remarkable happened. The slave brands on his forehead, the Shash and Sasnan glyphs, the physical marks of his failure and his shame that even Stormlight could not heal, began to flake away. They fell from his skin like scabs, leaving clean, smooth skin behind. The fourth ideal had not just granted him power, it had healed his very soul. And this journey was not his alone. His friends in Bridge 4 walked it with him. Teft, the sergeant, was haunted by his past. As a child, he had reported his family, members of a cult, to the City Lord and had watched them all be executed. He carried this self-hatred his entire life, fueling a deep addiction to the drug fire moss. He believed he was unworthy, a man defined by betrayal. But his own Honorspren, Vendorana, helped him see. To swear his third ideal, Teft confronted his own deepest hatred. He accepted that he too was worth saving. He swore, "I will protect those I hate, even if the one I hate most is myself." The Lopen's journey was different, yet just as profound. The one-armed, joyous Heraldian wanted to be a radiant. He was the first of Kaladin's squires to inhale Stormlight, and he used it, first and foremost, to regrow his missing arm. He bonded his own Honorspren, a mischievous spren named Rua. He swore his second ideal almost by accident while comforting a wounded soldier, and he swore his third when he finally realized that his constant, self-deprecating humor was, in fact, a weapon he used to hurt others. He realized he needed to protect people, even from myself. This is the beauty of the Order. The journey is different for everyone. Lopen's humorous, almost accidental path to the third ideal is just as valid, just as real, as Kaladin's agonizing, epic struggle. Each person must find their own way to protection. This brings us to the end of our story, and to its beginning. The journey of the Windrunners is a 7,000-year circle, from a failure to a redemption. In the final confrontation at Urithiru, Kaladin, now whole, now a Windrunner of the fourth ideal, confronts the mad Herald Ishar, the founder of the Oathpact, but he does not confront him with violence. He confronts him with understanding, and there he speaks the final words. He swears the Windrunner's fifth ideal. The words themselves are not for us to know, but we know what they did. The very act of him swearing this ideal, of a Windrunner finally completing the journey, unleashed a wave of pure honor. It dispelled the dark power that Ishar had been infected with. It was an act of healing that resonated through the broken Oathpact itself, beginning the process of healing the other heralds of their millennia-old madness. Kaladin's final oath was not an act of war. It was an act of healing. In the aftermath, the surviving heralds, Ishar, Nail, and the others realized they must reforge the Oathpact to bind a new god and protect the Spren. But their circle of 10 was broken. One space was empty, the space that belonged to Jezrien, the Herald of Kings, the original Windrunner who had been found in a gutter and murdered by Kaladin's old friend, Moash. And so Kaladin Stormblessed, the son of Tanavast, the man from Hearthstone, the slave, the bridgeman, the survivor, took his place. He became the new Herald of the Wind, the Herald of Second Chances, binding himself to the new Oathpact. The circle was complete. The story of the Windrunners is the story of a failure, a long darkness, and a final, painful redemption. Jezrien, the patron who failed the Oathpact, has been replaced by Kaladin, the Radiant who fulfilled the ideals. The son of Tanavast has taken his father's place, not as a god, but as something far more important. A man who swore an oath and kept it. The journey of the Windrunners is one of impossible burdens, of tragic failure, and the relentless, agonizing climb toward redemption. It is the promise that even in our weakest moments we can find the strength to protect, and that even if we fail, the journey itself gives us the honor. Thank you for sharing this story with me, my dear lore seekers.